The photograph that would change everything for Arjun Malhotra was sent to him by his cousin Vikram on a rainy Tuesday evening in March 2024, attached to a WhatsApp message that read simply, "Isn't this Priya?" The image, taken outside a Barcelona cafe, showed a woman laughing with a tall man, her hand resting on his arm with the casual intimacy of long-term lovers. The woman bore an unmistakable resemblance to Priya Sharma Malhotra, Arjun's wife, who had supposedly drowned during their honeymoon in Cancun 6 years earlier, whose body had never been recovered, despite extensive search efforts by Mexican authorities and private investigators hired by both families. The shock of recognition was so complete that Arjun initially dismissed the photograph as a cruel coincidence, perhaps someone who simply bore a striking resemblance to the woman he had mourned for over 2,000 days since that terrible morning when he had awakened in their beachfront hotel room to find her side of the bed empty and her belongings scattered as if she had left in a hurry for an early morning swim that would become her final act. The official investigation had concluded that strong currents and dangerous undertows had claimed another tourist victim, though Priya's body was never found, despite helicopter searches and underwater recovery teams that scoured miles of coastline. The death that had shattered Arjun's world had occurred on the 4th day of what was supposed to be a 2-week honeymoon, celebrating their arranged marriage that had blossomed into genuine love during their 6-month engagement period. Priya had been everything his traditional Punjabi family had hoped for in a daughter-in-law: educated, beautiful, from a good family, and apparently devoted to building a life that honored both American opportunities and Indian values in their comfortable New Jersey suburb, where second-generation immigrants balanced cultural heritage with professional success. The grief that consumed Arjun following Priya's disappearance was complicated by his inability to accept that someone so full of life and plans for their future could have been taken so suddenly and completely, leaving behind only questions about why she had gone swimming alone before dawn and what had possessed her to venture into waters that local authorities had warned against due to dangerous conditions that claimed several lives each year. Along that particular stretch of coast, the 6 years that followed Priya's supposed death were marked by Arjun's gradual withdrawal from social activities and romantic possibilities that his family and friends constantly encouraged, as they watched him transform from an optimistic young professional into someone whose emotional life seemed permanently frozen in mourning for a relationship that had lasted less than 8 months but had been intended to span a lifetime, according to the vows they had exchanged before 300 guests at a lavish ceremony in Edison, New Jersey. His parents, Raj and Sunita Malhotra, had spent years urging him to consider remarriage, arguing that Priya would have wanted him to find happiness again rather than living as a widower at such a young age. Their attempts to arrange meetings with suitable young women were consistently rebuffed by Arjun, who insisted that his heart belonged permanently to Priya's memory and that he could not imagine loving someone else after experiencing what he believed had been perfect compatibility and unlimited potential for shared happiness. The financial arrangements that had followed Priya's death included insurance payouts that Arjun had donated entirely to charities, supporting families of drowning victims, as well as the return of wedding gifts and the sale of the house they had purchased together but never had the chance to make into a home. His decision to move back in with his parents was initially seen as temporary grief accommodation, though it had become a permanent arrangement that reinforced his image as someone whose life had been irreparably damaged by loss. The memorial services that Arjun organized annually on the anniversary of Priya's disappearance had become important rituals for both families, providing opportunities to honor her memory while also maintaining connections between relatives who had been brought together by the marriage and remained bonded by shared grief over its tragic conclusion. These gatherings included traditional prayers, charitable donations made in Priya's name, and shared memories that reinforced the narrative of a young woman whose life had been cut short just as she was beginning to fulfill her potential as wife, daughter-in-law, and future mother. The investigation that Arjun commissioned into the Barcelona photograph began with his need to prove to himself that grief and wishful thinking had not compromised his judgment, though the digital analysis and facial recognition technology that he employed through a private investigator confirmed with statistical certainty that the woman in the image was indeed his supposedly deceased wife, living under circumstances that suggested she had been alive and well for years while he mourned her loss. The realization that Priya's death had been an elaborate fiction designed to facilitate her escape from their marriage and her family obligations created a psychological crisis that forced Arjun to question every memory of their relationship, while also confronting the possibility that the woman he had loved completely had been capable of inflicting such devastating deception on him and both their families for reasons that he was emotionally and intellectually unprepared to understand or accept. The private investigation that Arjun initiated through a Barcelona-based detective agency revealed the comprehensive nature of Priya's deception, including her new identity as Kavya Patel, her relationship with Italian businessman Leonardo Bianchi, and the sophisticated financial arrangements that had enabled her to maintain a comfortable European lifestyle for 6 years while her husband and families grieved her supposed death and struggled to understand how such a tragedy could have occurred during what should have been the happiest period of their lives. Detective Carlos Ruiz, the Barcelona investigator whom Arjun hired through international law enforcement connections, discovered that Priya had been living in Spain for over 5 years, initially in Madrid and later in Barcelona, where she had established herself as a freelance marketing consultant, working with international clients who valued her bilingual capabilities and cultural knowledge of both American and Indian business practices. The financial investigation revealed that Priya had systematically emptied joint bank accounts and credit lines during the weeks before their honeymoon, transferring substantial sums to offshore accounts that had been established using false documentation and identity theft techniques that suggested professional assistance in planning her disappearance and establishing her new life in Europe. The documentation that supported Priya's false identity included sophisticated forgeries of Indian and American identification documents, educational transcripts, and professional references that had enabled her to secure employment and establish banking relationships in Spain while avoiding detection by authorities who might have been monitoring international databases for missing persons or suspected fraud victims. The relationship between Priya and Leonardo Bianchi appeared to be genuine and long-term, with evidence suggesting that they had been living together for over 3 years and that Leonardo had been unaware of her true identity or criminal background when they began their relationship. His shock and cooperation with investigators indicated that he had been as deceived about her past as Arjun had been about her supposed death. The psychological profile that investigators developed based on interviews with people who had known Priya in both her American and European identities revealed a complex individual capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions while appearing to form authentic emotional connections with multiple people who had no awareness of her systematic dishonesty and criminal activities. Detective Carla Mendoza, the Mexican investigator who had handled the original missing person case in Cancun, had always harbored suspicions about the circumstances of Priya's disappearance due to inconsistencies in the timeline and physical evidence that had never been adequately explained by the drowning theory that had been officially accepted despite the absence of a body or conclusive proof of death. The reopening of the Mexican investigation revealed evidence that had been overlooked or inadequately pursued during the original inquiry, including security camera footage from the hotel that showed Priya leaving the building with luggage several hours before her supposed early morning swim, contradicting the timeline that had been established based on Arjun's account of their final evening together. The international cooperation required for investigating Priya's crimes created jurisdictional challenges that involved law enforcement agencies in the United States, Mexico, Spain, and potentially other countries where she might have traveled or established temporary residences during her 6 years of living under false identities while evading detection by authorities and family members who believed she was dead. The impact on Arjun's family was immediate and devastating, as the revelation that Priya was alive forced them to process not only relief about her survival, but also anger about the deliberate deception that had caused years of unnecessary grief and prevented Arjun from moving forward with his life, while he remained psychologically attached to someone who had systematically betrayed his trust and love. The media attention that the case attracted brought international focus to the phenomenon of staged disappearances and identity theft, highlighting the sophisticated techniques that could be employed by individuals seeking to escape their responsibilities and relationships, while causing devastating emotional damage to family members who were left to mourn fabricated deaths and struggle with unanswered questions about their loved ones' final moments. The confrontation between Arjun and Priya took place at the Barcelona police station, where she had been detained pending extradition proceedings, a sterile setting that seemed particularly inappropriate for a reunion between spouses who had been separated by what one believed was death and the other knew was deliberate abandonment for criminal purposes that had destroyed multiple lives while facilitating her escape to a new identity and lifestyle in Europe. Priya's appearance had changed significantly during her 6 years in Europe, reflecting not only natural aging, but also deliberate alterations to her hair color, style, and overall presentation that suggested conscious efforts to distance herself from her previous Indian-American identity while establishing her new persona as an independent international professional with no ties to family or cultural obligations that might limit her autonomy. The explanation that Priya provided for her actions combined claims about feeling trapped by arranged marriage expectations and family pressures with assertions that she had been suffering from depression and anxiety that made her previous life feel unbearable, despite the apparent happiness and success that others had observed in her relationship with Arjun and her integration into his family's traditional community structure. The emotional manipulation that Priya employed during their confrontation was designed to generate sympathy for her mental health struggles while minimizing responsibility for the devastating impact of her deception on Arjun and both families who had spent years mourning her loss and attempting to understand how such a tragic accident could have occurred during what should have been a joyful celebration of their marriage. The detailed timeline of Priya's escape plan revealed months of careful preparation that included research into international banking procedures, identity theft techniques, and destination countries, where she could establish a new life without being detected by family members or law enforcement agencies that might be investigating her disappearance or searching for missing persons matching her description. The financial crimes that Priya had committed extended beyond the theft of marital assets to include insurance fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft that had enabled her to maintain her European lifestyle while avoiding detection by authorities who might have been monitoring international financial transactions or immigration records for evidence of American citizens living abroad under false identities. The psychological evaluation that was conducted as part of the legal proceedings revealed personality disorders and antisocial traits that explained Priya's ability to maintain intimate relationships while systematically deceiving the people who trusted her most, including her capacity to express love and commitment while planning criminal activities that would destroy the lives of people who believed in her authenticity and devotion. The impact on Leonardo Bianchi was complex and traumatic, as he struggled to reconcile the woman he had loved for 3 years with the systematic criminal who had built their entire relationship on lies about her identity, background, and availability for authentic emotional connection. His cooperation with investigators reflected both his shock at discovering the truth and his genuine desire to help authorities understand the scope of Priya's deception. The legal proceedings that followed Priya's arrest were complicated by jurisdictional issues involving crimes committed in multiple countries under different legal systems, creating challenges for prosecutors who needed to coordinate evidence gathering and witness testimony across international boundaries while addressing the various criminal charges that applied to her activities in different jurisdictions. The media coverage of the case brought widespread attention to the sophistication of Priya's criminal activities, while also highlighting the vulnerability of family members to deception by trusted individuals who were willing to exploit emotional bonds and cultural expectations to facilitate criminal enterprises that caused extensive psychological and financial damage to innocent victims. The victim impact statements that were prepared by Arjun and his family documented the comprehensive damage caused by Priya's deception, including not only the obvious emotional trauma, but also the practical consequences of living for years under the shadow of grief and the social isolation that resulted from Arjun's inability to move forward with his life while he remained psychologically attached to someone who had deliberately caused his suffering. The criminal trial of Priya Malhotra required unprecedented coordination between legal systems in multiple countries, as her crimes had been committed across international boundaries and involved sophisticated financial fraud, identity theft, and insurance scams that challenged traditional approaches to prosecution and punishment in cases where defendants had successfully evaded detection for years while living under false identities. The prosecution's case was built around the systematic nature of Priya's deception and the extensive planning that had been required to stage her disappearance while establishing new identities and financial arrangements that would enable her to live comfortably in Europe without being detected by family members or law enforcement agencies investigating her supposed death. The evidence presented during the trial included digital forensics from computers and phones that revealed her research into disappearance techniques, financial records showing the systematic theft of marital assets, and testimony from witnesses who could establish her presence in various European cities during the years when her family believed she was dead. The defense strategy attempted to minimize Priya's culpability by emphasizing her mental health struggles and cultural pressures that had allegedly driven her to desperate measures, while also questioning the reliability of some evidence and suggesting that her actions were motivated by psychological distress rather than criminal intent to defraud her family and insurance companies. The testimony that Arjun provided about their marriage and the impact of her supposed death was emotionally devastating but legally essential for establishing the human cost of Priya's crimes, while also demonstrating the systematic nature of her deception that had required her to maintain false emotional intimacy while planning criminal activities that would destroy his life and psychological well-being. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been necessary for investigating and prosecuting Priya's crimes established important precedents for handling complex cases involving staged disappearances and identity fraud that crossed multiple jurisdictions while exploiting differences in legal systems and investigative capabilities between countries. The sentencing phase of the trial focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the financial scope of Priya's crimes and the psychological damage she had inflicted on numerous victims, while also considering the international implications of the case and its potential deterrent effect on others who might consider similar criminal activities. Priya received 12 years in prison, along with substantial financial restitution requirements and deportation to the United States upon completion of her sentence, reflecting the serious nature of her crimes, while also acknowledging the cooperation she had eventually provided with investigations into the techniques and resources that had enabled her elaborate deception scheme. The civil litigation that followed the criminal proceedings enabled Arjun and his family to pursue additional compensation, while also establishing legal precedents for holding criminals accountable for the comprehensive psychological damage caused by elaborate deception schemes involving staged death and systematic identity fraud that exploited family relationships and cultural expectations. The ongoing investigation into the networks that had assisted Priya's crimes revealed connections to professional identity theft operations and money laundering services that specialized in helping individuals disappear from their previous lives, while establishing new identities that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement and immigration authorities. The media attention that surrounded the trial brought sustained public focus to the phenomenon of staged disappearances, while also highlighting the sophisticated criminal techniques that enabled individuals to evade detection while living under false identities in foreign countries where their true backgrounds were unknown to local authorities and social contacts. The psychological recovery process for Arjun required him to rebuild his understanding of love, trust, and personal identity after discovering that his most intimate relationship had been based on systematic deception by someone who had been planning to abandon him even during their wedding ceremony and honeymoon period, when he believed they were building the foundation for a lifetime of shared happiness and mutual devotion. The family counseling that was arranged for the Malhotra and Sharma families addressed the complex emotions associated with learning that their years of grief had been unnecessary, while also helping them process feelings of anger, betrayal, and confusion about their fundamental beliefs regarding family loyalty, arranged marriage, and the reliability of cultural traditions that they had believed provided protection against such devastating deception. The relationship between Arjun and his parents was strengthened through their shared experience of victimization, though it was also complicated by his recognition that their traditional approach to arranged marriage had failed to protect him from someone whose capacity for deception had exceeded everyone's ability to detect or prevent criminal exploitation of cultural expectations and family trust. The community response to the revelation of Priya's survival and crimes created complex social dynamics within their Indian American neighborhood, where some members expressed sympathy for Arjun's victimization, while others questioned how such elaborate deception could have been overlooked by families who were supposed to thoroughly investigate potential marriage partners before formal arrangements were finalized. The financial recovery process involved extensive legal proceedings to reclaim assets that had been stolen by Priya, though much of the money had been spent or hidden in ways that made complete recovery impossible, despite the best efforts of international law enforcement and asset recovery specialists who worked to trace her financial activities across multiple countries and banking systems. The victim advocacy work that Arjun eventually undertook grew from his recognition that other individuals might be vulnerable to similar deception, leading him to speak publicly about his experience, while also supporting legislative initiatives designed to enhance protection for victims of elaborate financial and identity fraud that exploited personal relationships and cultural expectations. The educational initiatives that emerged from the case included programs designed to help individuals and families recognize warning signs of potential deception, while also providing information about legal protections and investigative resources available to people who suspected they might be victims of systematic fraud or identity theft by trusted family members or romantic partners. The international cooperation that had been essential for investigating and prosecuting Priya's crimes continued through ongoing efforts to identify and apprehend other members of criminal networks that specialized in identity theft and staged disappearances, while also sharing intelligence about emerging techniques and operational methods that criminals were employing to evade detection. The psychological research that was inspired by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of elaborate deception on victims' mental health and their ability to form trusting relationships, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from systematic betrayal by people they had loved and trusted completely. The policy changes that resulted from the case included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and missing person cases involving international travel, improved coordination between law enforcement agencies investigating staged disappearances, and strengthened penalties for crimes involving identity theft and insurance fraud that exploited family relationships. The ongoing impact of the case extended beyond individual justice to include systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim support, and international law enforcement cooperation that would protect other potential victims, while also providing resources for individuals recovering from the discovery that their most trusted relationships had been based on lies and criminal exploitation. The establishment of support networks for victims of staged disappearances grew from recognition that Arjun's experience was not unique, with other families having faced similar situations involving loved ones who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances that were later revealed to be elaborate criminal schemes designed to facilitate escape from family responsibilities and legal obligations, while causing devastating emotional trauma to survivors. The research initiatives that were funded through victim advocacy organizations contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological profiles and operational methods used by individuals who staged their own disappearances, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and support services for families dealing with the complex emotions associated with discovering that their grief had been based on deliberate deception. The legislative advocacy that emerged from the case included efforts to strengthen penalties for staged disappearances and identity fraud, improve international cooperation in investigating such crimes, and enhance support services for victims who needed assistance, navigating complex legal and financial recovery processes that could extend for years after the initial discovery of criminal deception. The educational programs that were developed to raise awareness about staged disappearances included information about warning signs that might indicate someone was planning to disappear, legal resources available to families dealing with suspicious missing person cases, and guidance for recognizing and responding to identity theft and financial fraud that might be associated with deliberate disappearances. The international cooperation initiatives that were supported by victim advocates included enhanced information sharing between law enforcement agencies, improved protocols for investigating missing person cases that might involve criminal deception, and strengthened diplomatic cooperation for pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after staging their disappearances. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed for victims of staged disappearances addressed the unique trauma associated with discovering that loved ones had deliberately caused their suffering, while also providing specialized approaches for rebuilding trust and emotional intimacy after experiencing such fundamental betrayal by someone who had been completely trusted. The technology initiatives that were prompted by the case included development of better systems for monitoring and detecting identity fraud, enhanced verification procedures for financial institutions and government agencies, and improved coordination between databases that might help identify individuals living under false identities in foreign countries. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to the case provided specialized assistance for families dealing with staged disappearances, while also offering practical guidance for legal and financial recovery processes that were often complicated by international jurisdictional issues and the sophisticated techniques used by criminals to hide their activities and assets. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that staged disappearances were part of larger criminal enterprises that included identity theft operations, money laundering services, and international fraud schemes that enabled individuals to disappear from their previous lives, while establishing new identities that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement and immigration authorities. The policy development that resulted from the case included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and insurance claims, improved coordination between agencies investigating missing persons and financial crimes, and strengthened international agreements for pursuing criminals who had fled their home countries after committing fraud or staging disappearances. The academic research that was inspired by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the social and psychological factors that motivated staged disappearances, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies. The long-term impact of such crimes on families and communities that had been deceived by trusted individuals. The long-term impact of Priya's crimes on Arjun's ability to form new relationships was profound and lasting, requiring extensive therapeutic intervention to address his fundamental mistrust of others and his tendency to interpret normal relationship challenges as potential signs of deception or abandonment that might lead to similar devastating betrayal and emotional trauma. The community healing process within their Indian-American social network involved difficult conversations about arranged marriage practices, family screening procedures, and the balance between traditional cultural values and modern awareness of psychological manipulation and criminal deception that could exploit cultural expectations and family trust for predatory purposes. The relationship between Arjun and potential romantic partners was complicated by his need to thoroughly investigate backgrounds and verify personal histories in ways that seemed excessive to people who had not experienced systematic deception, creating barriers to authentic emotional connection, while also providing necessary protection against potential exploitation. The legal precedents that were established through Priya's prosecution influenced how similar cases would be investigated and prosecuted in the future, creating frameworks for international cooperation and victim protection that would benefit other families dealing with staged disappearances and elaborate identity fraud schemes. The financial recovery efforts extended over several years as investigators worked to trace assets that had been hidden or spent by Priya during her years in Europe, with partial success in recovering some funds, while also establishing important legal mechanisms for pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after committing financial crimes. The victim advocacy movement that grew from Arjun's experience included specialized organizations dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also lobbying for legislative changes that would enhance protection for potential victims and improve law enforcement capabilities for investigating such sophisticated criminal schemes. The international cooperation that had been developed for investigating Priya's crimes continued through ongoing efforts to monitor and disrupt criminal networks that specialized in identity theft and staged disappearances, while also sharing intelligence about emerging techniques and operational methods used by criminals seeking to evade detection. The psychological research that continued to emerge from the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on victims' mental health, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and the factors that promoted resilience and recovery after experiencing such fundamental betrayal. The educational initiatives that had been developed to raise awareness about staged disappearances reached thousands of individuals through community programs, online resources, and media coverage that provided practical information about prevention and response, while also reducing stigma associated with victimization by trusted family members. The policy changes that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced verification procedures for various official documents, improved coordination between agencies investigating missing persons and financial crimes, and strengthened international agreements for pursuing criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability for their actions. The technological solutions that were developed in response to the case included better systems for detecting identity fraud and monitoring suspicious financial activities, while also providing tools for families and law enforcement agencies to verify identities and track individuals who might be living under false documentation in foreign countries. The establishment of the Arjun Malhotra Foundation, 5 years after Priya's conviction, represented his transformation from victim to advocate, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also funding research and prevention programs that address the sophisticated techniques used by criminals to exploit family, relationships, and cultural expectations for predatory purposes. The International Conference on Staged Disappearances that the Foundation sponsored annually brought together survivors, law enforcement officials, researchers, and policymakers from around the world to share knowledge about criminal techniques, while also developing more effective prevention strategies and support services that address the unique challenges posed by such elaborate deception schemes. The research initiatives that the Foundation funded contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological and social factors that motivated staged disappearances, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and therapeutic interventions for individuals and families recovering from the discovery that their most trusted relationships had been based on systematic deception. The victim support services that the Foundation operated included specialized counseling for families affected by staged disappearances, legal assistance for navigating complex international legal proceedings, and practical guidance for financial and identity recovery processes that could extend for years after the initial discovery of criminal deception. The educational materials that the Foundation produced provided practical information about recognizing warning signs of potential deception, while also raising awareness about the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used by criminals to exploit family trust and cultural expectations for elaborate fraud schemes. The policy advocacy that the Foundation undertook included support for enhanced international cooperation in investigating staged disappearances, improved victim protection services, and strengthened penalties for crimes involving identity theft and family fraud that exploited cultural traditions and personal relationships for criminal purposes. The corporate consulting services that the Foundation provided included risk assessment and fraud prevention training for organizations and institutions that might encounter individuals using false identities or engaging in systematic deception, while also supporting legitimate businesses that needed to verify customer identities and detect potential fraud. The international cooperation initiatives that the Foundation supported included enhanced intelligence sharing between law enforcement agencies and improved protocols for investigating missing person cases that might involve criminal deception, while also providing resources for diplomatic cooperation in pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed through Foundation research provided specialized approaches for helping families recover from staged disappearances, while also addressing the cultural and social factors that could make certain individuals vulnerable to exploitation by criminals who understood how to exploit traditional values and family expectations. The technology initiatives that the Foundation supported included development of better systems for detecting identity fraud and preventing staged disappearances, while also providing tools for families and investigators to verify identities and track suspicious activities that might indicate criminal planning or deception. The legislative achievements that resulted from the Foundation's advocacy work included enhanced penalties for staged disappearances and identity fraud, improved victim compensation programs, and strengthened international cooperation requirements that facilitated investigation and prosecution of criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability. The 10-year anniversary of discovering Priya's survival marked a significant milestone in Arjun's journey from victim to advocate, as he reflected on the personal transformation that had occurred through his pursuit of justice, while also recognizing the broader impact that his case had achieved in protecting other vulnerable families from similar exploitation and deception by trusted individuals who were willing to destroy lives for personal gain. The psychological research that had grown out of his case continued to advance understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on family relationships, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and prevention strategies that could help both potential victims recognize dangerous situations and survivors recover from fundamental betrayal. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential for investigating Priya's crimes had evolved into permanent frameworks for combating staged disappearances and identity fraud, with specialized units in multiple countries sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that had disrupted numerous criminal networks while establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals. The victim support services that had been enhanced in response to his case continued to provide specialized assistance for families affected by staged disappearances, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective support systems that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing systematic manipulation. The educational impact of Arjun's story extended far beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of elaborate deception and the importance of maintaining appropriate verification procedures, even within trusted family and cultural relationships that might seem immune to criminal exploitation. The policy changes that his advocacy had helped achieve continued to influence law enforcement procedures and victim protection measures, while also establishing legal precedents for prosecuting complex fraud cases and provide compensation for families who had suffered extensive emotional and financial damage through criminal deception. The technological solutions that had been developed in response to his case continued to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses and institutions that needed to protect themselves and their customers from sophisticated criminal schemes. The corporate partnerships that the foundation had established continued to produce innovative approaches to fraud prevention and victim support, while also providing resources for organizations that needed to balance security concerns with respect for cultural diversity and individual privacy rights in their operations and customer interactions. The international cooperation agreements that had been negotiated as a result of his case continued to facilitate beneficial collaboration between law enforcement agencies, while also supporting diplomatic relationships that balanced national sovereignty with international justice and victim protection in cases involving sophisticated transnational crimes. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Priya had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter. The psychological treatment protocols that had been developed through foundation research continued to provide specialized approaches for helping families recover from elaborate deception, while also addressing the unique challenges faced by communities whose cultural traditions and family practices had been exploited for criminal purposes. 15 years after Arjun Malhotra believed his wife had drowned during their honeymoon in Mexico, only to discover that she had staged her death to escape their marriage and steal their savings while living under a false identity in Europe, his story continues to serve as both a cautionary tale about the sophisticated nature of modern deception and an inspiring example of how personal tragedy can be transformed into meaningful advocacy that protects other vulnerable individuals and families from similar exploitation. The Arjun Malhotra Foundation has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 1,400 families, while also funding research and policy initiatives that have contributed to systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim protection, and international law enforcement cooperation across multiple countries and cultural contexts. The legislative changes that his advocacy helped achieve have been adopted across numerous jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also providing enhanced resources for victims and their families who need support navigating complex legal systems and recovery processes that are complicated by international boundaries and cultural factors. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Priya's crimes has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating elaborate deception schemes, with specialized units sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted hundreds of criminal networks, while also establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic manipulation, exploitation. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to his case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals and families affected by staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective therapeutic interventions that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing fundamental betrayal. The technological innovations that have resulted from foundation-funded research continue to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses and institutions that must balance security concerns with respect for individual privacy and cultural diversity in their operations. The psychological research that has grown out of Arjun's case continues to advance understanding of how cultural expectations and family traditions can be exploited by sophisticated criminals, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about resilience factors and recovery strategies that help both potential victims recognize dangerous situations and survivors rebuild their lives. The relationship between Arjun and the woman he eventually married, Dr. Meera Patel, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, has demonstrated that authentic love and trust are possible even after experiencing devastating betrayal, though their relationship required careful development and ongoing commitment to transparency and emotional honesty that honored both their individual healing needs. The ongoing impact of his advocacy work extends beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in international cooperation, victim support, and fraud prevention that continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques, while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploit cultural traditions and family relationships for predatory purposes. The story of Arjun Malhotra serves as a permanent reminder that while cultural traditions and family bonds represent some of humanity's most valuable institutions, these sacred relationships must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated predators who exploit trust and tradition to facilitate devastating crimes that can destroy lives and communities. His legacy lives on through the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by the awareness programs his advocacy made possible, the hundreds of families who have received support through his foundation's services, and the systematic improvements in law enforcement and victim protection that emerged from his comprehensive response to personal tragedy, ensuring that his suffering was ultimately transformed into lasting positive change that continues to benefit vulnerable individuals and families worldwide.